Hello and welcome to the 11 plus 10-minute test for Maths Paper 7. Do make sure that you've had a go at answering the questions yourself, which can be found in the video description or over at 11plushub.com before you continue. If you've already done that, let's go through the solutions. Okay, so question 1. What are all the prime factors of 170? Okay, so it's asking us to find all of the prime factors of 170. So the best way to find a number's prime factors is by using the branch method that goes like this. So 170 goes at the top, and then we find any two factors of 170. Any two that were multiplied together, so factor pairs of 170. For example, we can use 17 and 10, okay, because 17 times 10 is 170. Okay, now, are either of those prime numbers? If it is a prime number, what I do is I put a circle around it. Okay, now 17 is a prime number because it cannot be divided by anything besides itself and the number 1. Okay, so it's got two factors, 1 and 17. It has no other factors. That makes it a prime number. But the number 10 is not a prime number. It can be divided further by some other numbers besides itself and number 1. For example, we can branch out and do 5 and 2. Now 5 and 2 are both prime numbers. Okay, they can only be divided by the number 1 and itself. For example, 5 and 1 goes into 5 and nothing else, and 2 and 1 goes into 2 and nothing else. So we have come to the end. We cannot branch out any further, and we're left with 3 prime factors: 17, 5 and 2. And if you take a look at our options, option D says 2, 5 and 17. Therefore we know that that's the correct answer. Moving on to number 2. What is the sum of the first 3 prime numbers greater than 5? Okay, so sum means we need to add the 3 numbers together. But what 3 numbers do we need to add together? Well, it tells us the first 3 prime numbers that are greater than 5. So we're not including 5. We're only using numbers that are greater than 5, okay? So let's start with the number 6. Now 6 is not a prime number, is it? Okay, 7's a prime number, so we're definitely using that one. 8 isn't a prime. There are no even prime numbers besides the number 2. 9 isn't a prime because it can be divided by 3. 10 isn't a prime. Again, is an even number, which isn't 2. 11 is a prime, so we've got 2 prime numbers that are greater than 5. Then we've got 12, which can't be a prime number, but 13 is. So these are the first 3 prime numbers that are greater than 5. So what we need to do is add them together. So 7 plus 11 plus 13 gives us 31. And remember to add them very carefully because all of the options are very close to 31. So if you make a mistake whilst you're adding, you might get the wrong answer. So be very, very careful. Okay, question 3. A triangle has one right angle and an acute angle of 48 degrees. What is the size of the remaining angle? Okay, so we know that triangles, 3 angles, always add up to 180 degrees. That is the case for every triangle. It doesn't matter what sort of triangle we're talking about, scaling, isosceles, equilateral, does not matter. Its angles are always going to add up to 180 degrees, okay? Now, if we're told that it has a right angle, it's telling us that one of its angles is 90 degrees because a right angle is always 90 degrees. It also tells us that the triangle has an angle of 48 degrees. So we've got 90 degrees and 48 degrees. If we add them together, we get 138 degrees. And we know that the triangle must have 180 degrees. So to work out the missing angle, we need to find the difference between 180 and 138. Okay, so 180 subtract 138. That's how we're going to figure out the difference. And in this case, the answer is going to be 42 degrees, which is option A. Okay, let's move on to number 4. 8 subtract 3 multiplied by 5. We have two different operations in that question, subtraction and multiplication. And whenever operations are mixed together like that, we must use BIDMAS. Okay, so we've got brackets, indices, division and multiplication, addition and subtraction. Okay, so which one do we do first? We've got subtraction and multiplication. Multiplication is higher up BIDMAS than subtraction. Therefore, that's the part that we need to solve first. So we're going to solve the multiplication part of this question first, which is 3 multiplied by 5, which of course is 15. And now our question turns into 8 subtract 15, which can make some students feel uncomfortable because a lot of students believe we can't take 15 away from 8 because it results in a number which is less than 0. But of course we can. The best way to look at this is if we were to do 8 subtract 8, let's write this down here. So 8 subtract 8, we know that's going to give us 0. Now, we're not subtracting 8. We're actually subtracting 7 more than 8. So we need to take 7 more away from 0. So 0 subtract 7. Well, we're just counting backwards now, aren't we? On a negative number line. The answer is going to be negative 7 or minus 7, which is option C. Okay, moving on to question 5. What is 20% of 10% of 300? Okay, it can be a bit tricky to read that. So let's read it once more. Let's really break it down. The question says, what is 20% of? Well, what is it we need to find 20% of? We need to find 20% of this, 10% of 300. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what 10% of 300 is, which is very straightforward, isn't it? Because to find 10% of any number, we simply divide it by 10. That's how we find 10% of any number, okay? So the answer in this case is going to be 30. So we can already rewrite this question slightly because we know that 10% of 300 is 30. So the question now becomes, what is 20% of 30? How do we do that? Well, to find, again, 10% of any number, we divide that number by 10. So 30 divided by 10 is 3. So 10% must be equal to 3. And because I know that 10% is equal to 3, to find 20%, I'm just going to double 3 because 20% is double 10%. So 3 doubled is 6. So the answer must be option B, which is 6. Okay, number 6. What is the value of 6 squared plus 2 squared? Okay, so what does it mean? What does 6 squared mean? Well, 6 squared means 6 multiplied by itself. So we've got 2 lots of 6s, hence the small floating 2 there. Okay, so 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is the same as saying 36. And we need to add that to 2 squared, which is 2 multiplied by 2. Okay, so what's 2 times 2? That's 4. So our question can now be read like this. What is 36 plus 4? Which is way more straightforward, isn't it? 36 plus 4 is 40. Okay, moving on to number 7. If a car travels at a speed of 70 miles per hour continuously for 3.5 hours, how many miles does the car travel? Okay, right, so let's work out firstly. In fact, what I will do here is I will figure out how far the car travels in each hour. Okay, now we've got the first hour. Remember, this car's traveling for 3.5 hours, the second hour, and the third hour, and then we've got half of an hour. Okay, so let's just add very, very carefully what we already know, which is the car travels 70 miles per hour, which means 70 miles every hour. So for the first hour, the car must travel 70 miles. And the second hour, the car travels 70 miles. Because remember, it's traveling 70 miles every hour. The third hour, the car travels 70 miles. Now the fourth, not the fourth hour, but the fourth section here is only half an hour. Okay, Now, if we know that the car can travel or is traveling 70 miles in 1 hour, how are we going to figure out how far that car travels in half an hour? Well, we're just going to divide 70 by 2, aren't we? Which gives us 35. So for the half an hour here, the fourth section, the car can only travel 35 miles because that's half of 70, isn't it? We're only allowing the car half its usual time to travel. So now we've got 4 sets of numbers we just need to add together. 70 plus 70 plus 70 plus 35, or 70 multiplied by 3, and then we're going to add that 35 on. But in any case, you're going to get the answer 245 miles. Okay, let's move on to question 8. A landscaper is measuring the perimeter of a rectangular garden. She calculates that the perimeter of the field is 80 meters. If the length of the field is 32 meters, calculate the area of the field. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a random rectangle to represent the garden. Now let's think about what we're told. We're told that the length, the longest side of the rectangle, is 32 meters. The question tells us that. We don't need to do any maths there. It tells us that. Now, because I know that the length is 32 meters, I can actually put that number in both sides of this rectangle. Okay, because obviously the top and the bottom are the same size, aren't they? It's a rectangle. Now, we're also told that the perimeter of the rectangle is 80 meters. What that means is the distance of the outside of the shape is 80 meters. If we add all of the sides together, we get 80 meters. That's what perimeter means. Okay, we need to add all of its sides together. Now, if we add the top and bottom, so 32 meters and 32 meters, we get 64 meters. Yeah, let's put that number up here, 64 meters. Now, we know that if we add the other 2 sides, it needs to add up to 80 because we're told the perimeter is 80 meters. At the moment, we've accounted for 64 meters. Okay, so what do we need to add to 64 meters to get to 80 meters? We need to add another 16 meters. Okay, then we arrive at 80 meters. So I need to share that 16 meters between this side and this side because they're the same size. Okay, so we do 16 divided by 2. 16 divided by 2 is, of course, 8. So this side must be 8 meters and this side must be 8 meters. Now, if we were to add all of those sides together, so 32 plus 32 plus 8 meters, we're going to get 80 meters. So the perimeter works out. We know that we have the correct information, but we're looking for the area. Now, to figure out the area of any rectangular object, what we need to do is do length multiplied by width. So 32 multiplied by 8, or 32 meters multiplied by 8 meters. Okay, so we can use the column method to solve this. We've got 8 times 2, which is 16, so 6 goes underneath, 1 gets carried over. 8 multiplied by 3 is 24. Add the 1 that we carried over is 25. And then finally, we've multiplied the numbers together, 32 and 8. We now need to do meter multiplied by meter, which is meter squared. So 256 meters squared is the answer, option A. Okay, moving on to number 9. Rosie is collecting data about the number of cars passing her house. Between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., 32 cars drove past. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write that down because with questions like this, we've got lots of numbers flying about, haven't we? 9 and 10, 32. So we don't want to get too confused. So 32 cars was between 9 and 10. Okay. Then between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., 27 cars drove past. 27 cars. And between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., 13 cars drove past. And then it asks me, what was the mean number of cars passing her house each hour? Now, how do we figure out the mean? The mean is an average, isn't it? So what we need to do to figure out the mean is add all of our data together and then divide the answer by the number of different data inputs that we had. Okay, so let's do the first bit first. We add all of the data together. So 32 cars plus 27 cars plus 13 cars. That's going to give us 72 cars. So that's the total number of cars. And to find the mean, we need to get our total, which is 72. Let's put that over here. And divide that between the number of pieces of data that we had. We've got 3 bits of data, haven't we? 1, 2, and 3. So we do 72 divided by 3. So 3 into 7 goes twice with a remainder of 1. 3 into 12 goes 4 times. The answer is 24. Okay, and finally, our final question. Simon recorded data about the words used on the first page of a book. He noticed that the page contained 240 words, and the ratio of words beginning with consonants to words beginning with vowels was 2 to 1. How many more words began with consonants than vowels? Oh, it's a bit wordy, that question. No pun intended. So what we need to do is really make sure that we understand what's going on here. Okay. So what we're told is that there are 240 words. Now, when we read the entire question and we sort of gain that context, we know what we're looking for is how many more words on this page of a book were consonant than vowels. Now, there are 240 words in total, so that becomes something called the quantity. That's the whole number that we're trying to find parts of. Okay, so 240 is our quantity. Now, these 240 words are shared out at a ratio of 2 to 1. And remember, ratio is written respectively. So where it says words beginning with consonants first, and then it says words beginning with vowels, it means that the consonant words belongs to the 2 parts of the ratio, and the vowel words belongs to the 1 part of the ratio. So where do we go from here? Let me just put C for consonants and V for vowels so we don't forget. All right, so to find amounts using ratio, what we do is we add together the parts of the ratio. So 2 and 1, we're going to add them together and we get 3. So we've got 3 parts all together, and we need to get our quantity, which is 240, and divide 240 by the total number of parts, which is 3. So 3 goes into 24 8 times, and 3 goes into 0. Well, it doesn't. It goes in 0 times. And our answer is 80. Once we've got the answer to this part, 80 must mean how much each part is worth. Okay, 80 represents 1 part. So we know that this 1 part is 1 times 80. And over here, 2 times 80, which is 160. So there are 160 words beginning with consonants and 80 words beginning with vowels, which means that the difference between them is 80. There are 80 more words that begin with consonants than words that begin with vowels.